able to hear it there. Okay, with that thing, then I'm going to now do a little share for a second because I want to share this picture. Because I was talking to Alan today, verifying that, he was coming, and he told me about this, which is he has a big 2-page spread in Life magazine going on right now. And I thought that was amazing. I said, please share that picture with me. He also told me that his images rather have been on more than 80 magazine covers. And I was like, more than 80 magazine covers. So we have quite the expert here with us. And we're only, by the way, able to have this great opportunity because one of our members, Sean Trainer, has been a workshop attendee with Alan and a couple of his workshops. One was Texas migrating birds and another was Alaska eagles. So members of the Beaches Photography Club will remember seeing Sean's amazing Alaska eagles. Well, he learned how to do that from Alan. So I asked Sean, who couldn't be with us tonight, to give me a little bit of information to introduce Alan. And he was telling me that Alan, and I didn't know this, Alan is known as the bird whisperer. And the reason it comes from, and I don't think he's kidding after talking to Alan about some of the things that he does, is that Alan is noted for being able to get a bird to land on that tree and that branch in that place. And so, Alan, I'm sure there's some magic involved in that, and you're going to maybe share some of that magic with us a little bit. The other thing that Sean was saying is the things that you're going to teach us are going to be helpful for those that are taking pictures of birds in their backyards, not just running off to exotic places. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing. If I know how to do it, let's see, stop sharing. Did I stop sharing? No, you're screen sharing. Stop sharing. There we go. Okay, stop sharing. And now am I back to just my face? I think it's good. All right. With that said, Alan, I give you the floor and thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys. And you can hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, everybody. Thanks for being here. And I am going to share my screen and back to this. Okay. Liz, do you see the image we talked about earlier?
For a minute,
I muted myself. Yes, we did.
Okay, great.
man tonight. Or should we tell Dad you went?
Uh-oh, we found somebody we need to mute.
Father, I'm going out with.
Well, something we didn't need. No.
Which is more than I can say for two certain people.
Oh, hold on. We gotta mute Emily.
Words from my Lord.
I found it. Mute.
Am I good
We
to go?
got it, Alan. Oh, I muted you.
I'm okay. I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, sir.
All right. Am I good to go?
You are.
Great. Thank you. So I am going to be talking about all the things that go into basically picking the right image to put in your portfolio. And there's a lot that goes into that. And of course, all of this is subjective. It's what I believe it works, but there's no rules to art. So it doesn't mean that it's right. But I want to share with you the different elements I think that go into making a really good image. First of all, since we're all shooting digital, most of us, we're shooting between 10 and 120 frames a second, which means you can come back from a photo shoot with a lot of images that are very similar. And it can be overwhelming how to go through all those and find out what's the best image, what ones to keep. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, start with that. So I'm going to talk about how to choose the best image to process. So if you're doing landscape, you're not coming back with hundreds, if not thousands of images. But if you're photographing anything that's moving, you're definitely going to be taking a lot of images. So here's an example of an afternoon shoot in Texas where I was doing cardinals. I know you guys have cardinals up there. So this is just a screen grab of a browser looking at part of the images that I photographed. And it's quite possible to have hundreds and hundreds of these images that kind of look very similar. So it's
Alan, we're actually not seeing a screen grab. We're just seeing your face right now.
just my face.
Just your face. You might have to do share.
I thought I did. Oh my gosh.
That's okay.
Okay, let's go back here.
And then if you put it in slideshow mode,
What are you seeing now?
well, let me see. Let's see here. I've got it. I'm on standard view and I can see it. Can everybody else see it?
I can see it.
Do you
Okay.
see the
I
slide?
see
Everyone
Alan,
else?
I see Alan Murphy photography, not the Cardinal.
Okay,
No,
well, he's going to get to that.
Do you see the text that says choosing the best image to process?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
Yes, we all see that.
that's what we see. All right, so we're moving on. Do you see the slides of the cardinal?
yes.
Okay, I'm sorry for that. All right. It's always something with technology. So we have dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of images that look similar. So when it comes to birds, here's, of course, I've been shooting for a long time. So what I'm looking for is either the same, is equal to what I have or better. So I go through and dump a lot of images. But if you're just starting out, it can be a little overwhelming. But here's a little few things that might help you decide on what does not work. So here's a nice, sharp, well-exposed image of a cardinal. But this is a throwaway image for me because of these reasons. One, the crown is down, the crest. It's not truly showing the essence of the bird. Secondly, he's leaning forward in a horizontal position, and that means he's ready to bolt and take off. And he's definitely has the presence of knowing that the photographer is there. So the image suddenly becomes a little tense, and it becomes more about the photographer than it does about the bird. It's not relaxed. Do you see this image of the vertical cardinal?
Yes.
Night and day. Okay. This one, he's all tense, ready to go. This one, he's relaxed. His crest is up and tail down. So picking images out, I always like to look for the tail to be down and not horizontal. And if the bird has a crest, and just the body to be relaxed with the feathers. And, different ways to get those images. Obviously, the more you cover up and hide, but that's a whole nother topic. But if you have these images, this will be the one to pick out. The other thing I look for is eye contact. And now if you ever photograph your kids or, anybody, you don't want them looking away from the camera because it loses the connection. It's no different with wildlife. And you probably know this, but here's a picture of a rose-breasted grosbeak, and it's almost parallel to us. But if you can see the difference between those two images, if the head of the bird is slightly like a 45-degree angle towards the camera, the power in the image increases dramatically. So now there's a connection between the viewer and the subject. It's really very simple. But like I say, if you've got dozens and dozens of images and you're not sure which one to pick out, these are the things you want to use as a criteria. Here's another thing I go through. If you're picking images and the bird's moving around all over the place and you have just one eye showing, that's totally okay. If you have two eyes showing, that's totally okay. What gets awkward is when you have 1.5 eyes or a piece of an eye. Okay, it's just a little something, but it does give the image a little awkwardness. So again, the two on the left would be ones that I would keep, and I wouldn't necessarily keep the one on the right. As far as the connection between the viewer and the subject, here we have a painted bunting singing. Now, any nice shot of a painted bunting with a nice clean background, I would probably want to keep anyway. But if you have multiples of them, you can see this bird singing, and that's okay. He's singing parallel to the camera. But here he comes around, he's slightly more towards the viewer, and it becomes a little bit more intimate. But the best thing is, again, that 45-degree angle. Now you can see into the mouth, and that is where the song is coming from. And that brings the viewer into the world of the painted bunting singing. So just another little example of things to look for. Here's one that is, I see a mistake happen a lot with photographers. Here's a green-winged teal in the water, nice, lovely lights, low angle, bird looks great. But if you look at where the bird is, he's almost swimming past you. He's either directly in front of you or slightly moving away. Compared to this, the bird is almost approaching your parallel. Okay, huge difference. So this bird on the right has better eye contact. He's moving towards the viewer. Once he gets to halfway, right in front of you, then the value of the image drops. And I can show you a better example of that, especially with birds in flight. People always ask me, you know, they show me images that I'm like, I know you have better images than that. And it's all based on what you're picking. So here's a Eurasian oyster catcher. When I was in Europe, I was taking pictures of these guys, and it worked out where, you know, the first one has some value, and then the next shot is great. That's probably the peak position of a bird in flight. This is where he's right in front of you. Not so great. The one before you is stronger. Then once he's leaving, it drops in value completely. And then as they're flying away, I just throw those away completely. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is in all my workshops, I'll see people on the cliffs shooting birds flying by. And once they're past them, they're still shooting. And the bird's flying away, and they're missing the next birds coming along. So being productive means letting those birds go and get back on the next bird. Now, if I was to give you a score on these positions, here's what we're going to do. Score out of 1 to 10. So that would be an 8 out of 10. It's a keeper for sure. This is a 9 out of 10. It's coming closer. But that is the best position right there. That would be a 10 because you're seeing both wings, depending on the position of the wings, but the angle of it is that you've got the furthest wing away being in the lead position, and that normally is the case in this position. Once it gets right in front of you or slightly past, look at the value drops completely down to a 5, and then a 2, and then a 0. Okay, I'll show you another example of this. We're in Iceland doing puffins, and nothing wrong with that. It's an 8. He's looking at the camera. He's got fish in his mouth. Now it's coming along. It's even better because the body is becoming more parallel to the camera. And then you've got that shot right before they pass, where you could see both wings. You can see the full body, the head, the intimacy is there. And then that is right in front of the camera, like right in front of you as he's passing, but it becomes a little flatter because the wings merge over each other. So these are little pet peeves, but this is something too, when you're picking out all your flight shots, forget those ones, right? When the bird is past you, it drops in value to a 2 and then a 0. There's no, unless you're I had a client who was a wood carver, and I kept asking her, why are you shooting all the birds' butts? She says, because I need references for my carving. And I never thought about that. So if you have that reason, then go ahead and shoot them. I'm going to talk about cropping and composition, but I just want to stop real quick and see if anyone has any questions on that. Is there any questions, Liz?
Right now, no. Anybody, unless anybody,
Okay.
yeah, we're good.
That's fine. And if anybody has questions, you could just put them in the chat and then we can get to them, because I'm going to stop every few minutes just to go over this. Cropping and composition, there's probably not a lot I can teach you on this. You guys are all probably well versed in composition, but I'll just go over the fundamentals. This is a molting summer tanager, and you can see that I put him in the rule of thirds. That meaning dividing the frame up into 3 and then putting your subject on that line. Now, to add even more value is to divide it into thirds vertically. And then you got the crosshairs there, and that's where the bird is, right bang smack in the middle of that. And that's a good rule to do your compositions. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, don't you put the eye on the third? Well, that depends on the size of the subject. In this case, the bird is, he's small in the frame and the eye is tiny. So to put the eye there would offset the composition and be a little uncomfortable. But if you've got a picture like this, where you're doing a headshot, then I would definitely put the eye right through the rule of thirds, okay? And of course, these are just general rules. It doesn't always apply. It depends on the type of bird. I mean, if it was a great blue heron with a really long neck, it might not work out. Here's some examples of some other stuff I've done vertically. A little boreal chickadee hanging on a pine cone, and I put him down at the rule of thirds, but I had to be slightly off because I wanted to include the pine cones, which I think was a big part of the image. So I got to play with it a little bit, which is the nice thing about what we do. We get to make decisions. And then, of course, vertically, the bird is dead center, right? Down the middle of the frame like that. And you can do that on verticals. I don't do it on horizontals. There are some exceptions, which I'll go over in a minute. But most of the time on verticals, I put the bird dead center in the frame, but I do put him in the rule of thirds vertically. So he's 2/3 of the way up, as you can see. Okay. That's a catbird on some kind of berry. So when can you break the rule where you don't want to center the bird in a vertical format? When can you move the bird to the side? I think only when you have a competing amount of interest. So in this example here of a ferruginous pygmy owl, I was able to get this owl to land on this beautiful lichen branch. And the lichen branch, with all the pods and seeds and the lichen, has so much character, I did not want to crop that out. So I was able to move the bird to the right, and there's equal interest in the overall image. So that works vertically if you want to move the bird off to one side. Here's another example. I actually shot this in your area, in St. Augustine area, many years ago. And I went out and we found this gorgeous stump full of lichens. But it's a big part of the image. So I didn't want to, crop it out and make the owl be the prominent part of the image. So you can see here, he's in the rule of thirds vertically and horizontally. So that worked out really well. Now, when can you center a bird horizontally? There are times that you can do that. And here's an example. If you ever have a bird in the water where there's circular rings in the water, the ripples, then that warrants you putting the bird in the middle. Even if he's looking to the left or the right, if you crop off the rings, it gets awkward. Now, you probably never noticed that before. Now that I brought it up, it's gonna mess with your head, because every time you look back at your image, you're gonna go, oh, I see it now. But yeah, if you've got cylindrical rings in the water, you definitely want to try to center the bird. I think that anchors it really, really well. Here's another example. A ruddy duck. I don't know if you've ever photographed these birds. They're pretty amazing, tiny little ducks. And he's in there doing a display, and you can see he's created a little foam bubble home there. And so I used that in my composition. I took the white water, the bubbles, and I centered it. These ruddy ducks, they don't blow bubbles. What they do is they inflate these air sacs in their chest, and they vibrate them really fast to create these bubbles. And they do that to attract the females. And I can tell you that it doesn't work, because I've tried it. Here's another example of where you can center a horizontal composition. If you have an asymmetric thing going on, such as this razorbill has both wings spread out, tail spread out, feet spread out, and it would be awkward to put that anywhere else other than in the center. You could put it higher in the frame, which gives a sense of movement that he's dropping, but you could also add space on the top as if he's coming up. In this situation, he was flying up to the cliff to land. So you get to make that choice. Another example of centering it would be when you have a situation like you've got two redneck grebes and they are calling, and the power of that image is dead center between the two birds' heads where they're communicating. And so that is, I could not see a way of putting that left or right. So that was another image that I chose to center it. And then one more where I've got this little kittiwake on this massive rock formation, which I thought was pretty neat. And I wanted to include the whole thing. It's almost like a frame. So that's centered. So, you get to, there are certain rules, but then you get to break them whenever you want to. Here's an example of me breaking a rule. This is a thick-billed murre out in St. Paul Island in the Pribilofs, and beautiful lichen rock. shows the bird in his environment, and it's a close-up and it works really well. But I really wanted to show his habitat more, and I wanted to show that gorgeous rock he was on. So I cheated and I put him over there. And what does help this composition is the bird is looking into that open negative space there, which is the Bering Sea. And then the other thing that helps it is the line of the rock is sloping down to the right. So it tends to anchor the frame quite well. So that's a rule I broke, and it works for me, but it's all a matter of taste. Sometimes compositions can be really difficult. Like, for example, if you've got a bird that's got a really long tail, in order for me to give that bird space in front of him and keep the aspect ratio, I would have to really make that bird small in the frame. So there are times when it's just very difficult. You have to decide what you want to do. And in this case, the bird was just on a grassy lawn, so there wasn't anything of interest for me to include him to be smaller in the frame. But and that's okay. Another example is I had a female ruddy duck that I was photographing with babies, and I sat there for an hour while they were all sleeping, waiting for them to just get in line, because they would just bob around a little bit. And when I finally got the shot, of course, using our normal aspect ratio, there was so much negative space on top and bottom that it just it made the birds really look very small. So in those cases, I do a pano crop. And there are times when that works really well. And when you have things going across the screen like that in a horizontal format. On cropping, if you're ever doing birds in flight in groups, it's impossible when birds are flying through the sky to literally do your composition while you're capturing it. So you'll get home and you'll look at this, and this was a bunch of Western sandpipers flying, and there's nothing wrong with the image, except if you look at this, there's half a bird on the left and half a bird on the right. So this is something you want to avoid. Now, can you avoid that when you're taking the picture? Not necessarily, but you can certainly avoid it when you are cropping it. Or if, like me, all I do is just clone them out. And the reason for that is just to allow all the space around the flock of birds to be able to have a sense of movement and a place to be, rather than having birds bleeding off the frame. So it'd be like an artist painting something and then leaving a little blob on the side. It just is a little distracting to me. So it depends on your ethics there, whether you want to clone something out like that. But if you go back to that, those have no value at all, poor little guys. So we got rid of them. There's one thing about composition that those of us that have zoom lenses can do where others cannot. And that is because we have this bouquet of smooth out of focus background, I use the negative space behind the birds in certain situations, like, perching birds like this, where I do. I use the negative space in my compositions. For example, here's a painted bunting eating berries. And if you look, I'm going to highlight the negative space. So if you look at this, I'm going to call that A. If you could just take a rough idea of the volume of that, it's kind of equal to B, right? So if I was to frame it differently and add more space at the bottom, that negative space would become more prominent and be a little awkward. So that's another thing I do. And here's an example. Here's a busier version of a painted bunting on lantana. And the way I was able to crop this, this was a setup I did at one of my workshops. I actually put the branch of lantana over this little water drip where they were coming in to bathe. And then I actually put some lantana in the background. So I kind of designed a set before the bird even landed there. And of course, I knew he was going to land there because that's the only spot that was available for him with a little piece of branch. So, and that's just one of the things I do on my workshop. So the bird landed there, and it's so exciting when you plan it and it works. But while I was setting it up, I had in mind about the negative space. And I darkened it here just to show you that there's no huge volumes of dark space all off by itself. You can see that it's kind of evenly balanced throughout the image, okay? And for example, in that image there, the upper right corner probably has the most dark area. So if I was to recrop that and give that more space up there, to me, that would be awkward for me. So I brought that corner down, and I've got the bird almost in the rule of thirds and so on. So sometimes the plants don't always allow you to, if you're trying to keep the flowers and so much, they can struggle with your composition. Here's an example of that. I was shooting birds in flight, and this Audubon's oriole flew over to this yucca, I think it is, and started feeding on it. And I quickly moved over and grabbed a couple of images, and I didn't have time, or I missed the composition completely. This was full frame. So now what do I do with that? Because look at all that negative space. It doesn't work on the right. So if I was to crop it down and try to reduce that negative space on the right, now the bird is kind of squashed in there. He's a little tight. So here's what I'm looking at now. Is there a vertical composition in there? And there is. All right. So now we've got you got the negative space up here, which is a little strong. You've got so in order for me to get the negative space correct, I'd have to move the frame to the left more like that. But now I'm cutting into the bird. The other thing I always want when I'm doing birds on perches, especially if the perches are asymmetrical or at an angle, is if you can get the perch to enter or leave the frame in the corner, it adds a lot more power and value to the image. So there's a lot going on here. I'm confused. I'm like, okay, how do I get this negative space balanced? And how do I get the plant into the corner of the frame? So as you can see here now, the negative space is better, right? It's equally balanced between the three open areas. The plant's leaving out of the left-hand corner, which is strong, but now my bird's caught in pieces, right? So what do? Here's a little trick that you can do, and you probably know this, but if you don't, this is something I do quite often. I take it into Photoshop, all right? So now there's my image, and I do not have the plant in the corner, but I have the frame of the bird where I like it. So if you take your crop tool and make sure you have content aware checked at the top, it should be defaulted, but maybe not. Now with generative fill and different things, it might be something else. But anyway, have that checked, and then you take your cursor, your crop tool cursor outside of the frame, and it gives you this rotation option. So all I did was rotate the frame and drag the right side down so that now I have the corner of the plant going in out of the corner. I've also got my negative space in order, and I've got the bird all nice in the frame without being cropped off. And when I crop it, those upper and lower ends will be filled in with the content aware, meaning that the computer, which is way smarter than me, looks to see what's next to it and fills it in with the appropriate background. And it's pretty amazing. So there's the final image. Okay, so now I have the plant going out the corner. I've got my negative space all balanced, and I've got the bird. Now the bird is a little bit more rotated than it was in real life, but you would never know that if I hadn't told you. Okay, so not to give you a headache with it, but I want you to look at those images when you're cropping them and see if there's an option to bring all of that into it. The negative space, the stalks leaving the corner, the bird having balanced around it, because it can be done. Here's another example, and I'm getting picky here, but a Forester's tern in a dive, and I'm going to crop this. And you can see my area, what I would like to crop on the left. But what I want is I want the bird to be flying through the diagonal between the two corners. Because again, that to the viewer is more dynamic and more powerful. But the bird is slightly off, right? And you can see it's going through one of his feet, and it's not going through the head. Easy fix. Back into Photoshop, quickly do a rotation. And now my bird is going straight down that diagonal line, and then I crop it like that. A really easy thing to do. But if you can have the energy of the movement of the bird or the direction that it's going in, or leaving from, anchoring into one of the corners, it definitely will improve your composition. So I am going to talk a little bit about choosing the best wing position, because when you have all these images of birds flying, for example, people always ask me, well, what's best, up or down or whatever? I'm going to talk about that. Before I do that, are there any questions?
Yes.
Okay.
We have one. Folks are talking about how beautiful your bokeh or bouquet, however you want to say it, is in the background. And the question is you're using a zoom lens? What is your aperture when you're doing that?
Okay, good question. So I mostly use a 600 millimeter f4 lens, which is probably the best lens you can use for birds. Birds are small, you need the reach, but the 600 has such a narrow depth of field that anything behind the bird ends up being out of focus. So that's not something that I've done. That's just the design of science and to do with the lenses. Now, it does depend on the distance the background is. For example, if you're shooting a bird that's 20, 30 feet away, if you're, let's say in your backyard and you're setting up your feeder, you set it up 20 feet away and you're sitting there shooting it, you want your background to be twice as far as that. So you want your background to be 40 feet away. So if you've got a fence or a lawn or something, then you'll get that bokeh with most lenses, okay? The further the background, let's say you're able to set up a feeder and you have a distant hill that's a mile away, then it becomes completely out of focus. So you get to choose those things. And even with a 600 f4 lens shooting at 20 feet away, if I increase my aperture to say f8, so make sure I get the whole bird in the frame, I still have that bokeh, because the depth of field is so narrow, I may only have 1.5 inches of depth of field. If an f8, I might at the most increase it to 2 inches. So that's the beauty of using those large telephoto lenses.
So saying that back to you, it's more important the distance from the background from the subject than the
Yes.
aperture.
Yes, it is. That's the
So,
key.
right?
So
Okay. So
don't
you
have to
said,
have a massive telephoto lens to get that background. You just need your backgrounds to be as far away as possible.
okay, that's super.
Yeah.
I think that answers
So if
our.
you're shooting with a 300 lens, you're going to have more depth of field just by science. I mean, it's just the way it is. And so your backgrounds could start showing up busier. But if you can arrange it to where it depends on where you're shooting, of course, and what control you have over it. But if you can find your backgrounds the furthest away, the better the image ends up being, in my opinion, if you want that, unless you're trying to include habitat. But if you're trying to isolate the bird and show off the bird, then that's the way to do it.
Okay, very good. That's
Yeah.
very good. And then we had some other people, just lots of people are commenting on how beautiful yours are, and a good amount of people said what your throwaways we would love.
I
So,
appreciate that.
and
love
I was going to say too, you really did get a bird to land exactly where you told it to land on that one.
it's a thing I've done since childhood, and yeah, I love it. And of course, I have other talks that go into all these other techniques in more detail. And I do like to show some of my original images that I took when I first started photography, and they're so bad. And I thought they were so good. So we all start out the same. We all, my first image of a painted bunting was in the middle of a bush, out of focus, busy, black. And the sun was above, and it was so contrasty, and it was awful. And I thought, oh, this is so good. It's going to be a magazine cover. But, until I learned all this information, I was having a great time. It doesn't really matter. But I like to show, just by using different techniques, how you can go from, something that you think is great to something that's really wonderful. So anyway,
And that's it. You're back in action.
Great. All right. So choosing the best wing position. So here's a red-tailed hawk flying by. So he's got wings fully down. He's got wings fully up. So which is better? I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But in general, what you don't want is that, unless he's banking or turning. But if he's just gliding by, and the reason for that is you want to show, on the left image there, you can see the primary feathers and the depth and the color and all of that, and the detail of the flight wings. And on the second shot, the wings are up, almost the same thing, but the wings up are showing you more of the body and the legs. So which one's better? It's hard to say. It depends on the species. But what doesn't work is the third one. because you're not seeing anything. You're not getting the value of the wings. So that's just a little thing that will help you when you're going through your images and you want to, pick the ones that you want to post or frame or print, whatever you want to do. Here's another example. Broadtail hummingbird, wings forward, wings back. And this is what you don't want. You do not want the halfway stuff because it doesn't really do the wings any justice. It doesn't show off the bird really well. So in this example, the wings forward are lovely. They're transparent. The wings back are lovely. Which is better? Well, it's debatable, but in my opinion, since the bird's iridescence is all the way down through the throat and all the way down through the body, I would pick the second image in the middle there where the wings are back, because it just shows off more of the bird's body, because the bird has a really iridescent body. Now, if that was a female and didn't have all that color, then maybe the wings forward would work. So you have to decide. And here's a couple of slides that will help you kind of get this idea. Here's a couple of frames of red-winged blackbirds. The one on the left wings up, one on the right kind of wings down. Which is better? Well, the one on the right, because it's showing what the bird is named for, the red wings, the epaulets. So in my opinion, that one trumps it. Here's another example. Green-winged teal. There's nothing wrong with that image on the left. I definitely would not throw that away of a wing stretch like that. But it's a green-winged teal, and the wings down and forward showing the teal wing, I think trumps it. So again, when you're picking your images out, you don't want those awkward wing positions. Here's another one, a Pyroluxia. That's a bird found in deep South Texas. It's kind of the Western version of the cardinal. Has a bill like a parrot. Anyway, they're gorgeous birds, but they're red underneath. You never see the red until they fly. So capturing them in flight like that, I think if you have those frames, that would be the one I would represent the species with, because of the amazing color. Wing stretches. Couple of examples of an American avocet doing a wing stretch, and the Pacific golden plover doing a wing stretch. And if that's part of your goal to try to include those in your portfolio of bird images, there are things you should do to plan for it. Now, first of all, when birds are preening, they're getting ready to do all this stuff, and they will do a wing stretch. So that's an indicator too. I was on the beach in Galveston, and there was a huge flock of black terns, and these are in basic plumage, by the way. They're not black, but there was a lot of them. And I noticed that every time before one would fly off, he would stretch his wings. So I crept up and I sat with this one for like 20 minutes waiting. Now, you can see the position of the framing in this. This is what you need to be doing if you're doing this, is give it a lot of room on top. I mean, more room than you think, because look at that. If I hadn't have framed it that way, I would have cropped that bird, the wings off completely. So that's just a little tip on that. So I'm going to talk about the best shutter speeds for flight. And this comes up in my workshops all the time, and I have some good information on that. So is there any questions so far, Liz or Helen?
Yes, we do have one for you, Alan, and it's a three-part question. It's a little bit loaded, but here goes.
Yeah.
She says, when editing, which are the settings that you tend to manipulate most? That's the first part. Do you ever use presets? Second part. And how do you give your pictures a punch while keeping them looking natural?
Okay, that is a loaded question. Settings. I'm not sure of the first question. How do I manipulate the settings in the?
Which are the settings you tend to manipulate most?
Oh, in regards to the processing, I guess.
I don't know.
I think so, based on the
See
other
if
two
she
questions.
clarifies.
Yeah. Okay. So I shoot in RAW, which means the image is going to come out looking pretty flat. And I don't do a lot of gaudy processing. I use levels.
I'm sorry, her question was, she says yes, with editing processing.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I could talk for hours on editing, but basically, I do basic settings in Camera Raw, or if you're using Lightroom, and those will basically just be to bring up the highlight or bring down the highlights, bring up the shadows, and I don't add any saturation or anything like that. Very, very simple. When I get into Photoshop, which is what I use all the time, I use selective color to change the neutrals, the blacks, to give the image punch. And that is something I would need to demonstrate. And I do stuff on, I actually have videos on my website that teach that. So there's a lot of things, and I use vibrance. I don't use saturation if I'm going to punch up an image a little bit in color, and I use very little. So I try not to overdo stuff. Was there another part to that that I missed on that question?
How do you give your pictures a punch while keeping them looking natural?
Yeah, so the punch comes from, instead of using levels, which if you use the white slider, it'll brighten it up, and that's okay. If you use the black slider, it adds black to everything and it makes it muddy. So I don't do that. What I do is I go into selective color, and it brings you a drop down of all these different colors, and I will choose black, and I will add black to the blacks. So it only touches the blacks, which is really nice. So like the eyeball will punch out any, like this, I'm going to show you these two hawks right here. The blacks on these feathers would stand out. And then I go into neutrals in the drop down and add blacks to that. And that gives the overall punch to the image without making it overly dark or muddy. So I hope that helps. But that would be a whole different talk or a whole different presentation.
And there was one more question for you.
Yep. Go ahead.
It was, are you using Flash? And if so, when and how?
Great, wonderful question. I used Flash for probably 20 years as a fill-in. And ever since the sensors and the digital cameras became like they had more dynamic range and more detail in the blacks, I stopped using Flash. I don't know any pros now that use Flash because of that reason, because we can bring everything out to make it look like it, whatever Flash was doing, filling in the shadows. We can do that now in post-processing. So I'm really grateful that I don't have to carry around my Flash and my tele extender and all the batteries and cables that go with that. So no, I don't use Flash anymore. Yep. We're good to move on?
That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's get into shutter speeds. So with clean ISOs on the cameras today, we're not handicapped by shutter speed anymore. So I want you to get used to that, because a lot of people are like, really, that's shutter speed? Well, yes. So here we have an example of Cooper's hawks and a sharp-shinned hawk flying. Now, when pelicans and herons and birds that glide and fly slowly and you're panning with them, you can get away with fairly slow shutter speeds because the bird's not moving across your sensor. You're moving the sensor with the bird. So the wings are flapping slowly. You can get away with 400 shutter. And that's in very low light. At the minimum, I would use is 1600 shutter for that kind of photography, right? Where you're on a beach or you're somewhere and you've got, slow moving birds flying by and you're panning with them. 600 would be my minimum. But a lot of what we're doing now, especially on my workshops, we're doing songbirds in flight. And I have all kinds of techniques where I get that to happen for you in front of the camera, but you have to be prepared. So I wanted to show you why I think the shutter speeds I'm about to tell you work best. And I see a lot of people where what they're looking at in their images in a flight shot as sharpness, they're looking at the head of the bird. And I would think that most of them would be sharp anyway. What you need to look at is the wingtips, because that's moving the fastest through the sensor, all right? So here's an example of a kiskadee, and I hope you can see this, because I'm having to put these in small little thumbnails, but the wingtips on that at 2000 shutter is blurry. And even at 3000, it's blurry. So I'm going up here to 4000. Can you see how it's starting to get sharper, right? At 4000 shutter. Here's one at 5000, and it's starting to get really clean. But my go-to shutter speed for any songbird in flight is 8000. Now, for the last 20 years, we could never, or beyond that, I'm just saying up to just a few years ago, we really couldn't find a way to do 8000 shutter because the noise in the cameras were bad. And so on. But now, with the noise removal softwares coming out and the clean sensors, 8,000 is easy. And so don't be shy to use that, even if you don't need it, because you never know when a bird is going to burst into action or burst into fighting or something. And if you have that shutter speed, it's going to give you some amazing images. So 8,000 shutter is the equivalent of a burst of flash. So like what you're shooting hummingbirds with to freeze the wings, the 8,000 shutter will do that. So here's some examples. This is a Gambel's quail flying up to a perch, and there's no flash. This is just ambient light at 8,000 shutter, and the wings are tack sharp. Here's a broad-billed hummingbird shot without any flash, just 8,000 shutter. So, and of course, if you have good sunlight, it really helps. But I often do it even in overcast days, because once you get used to it, you won't like the results if you go back down to 3,000 or 1,600. So I really want you to kind of practice with this if you're doing any kind of action, fast action, and maybe if you're doing mammals, it's not so important, but definitely birds flying. Here's a pair of Baltimore Orioles fighting, and it looks like it's frozen with flash. I mean, it's just crisp. Anytime you're doing birds bathing, or anything but water splashes, you want 8,000. You know, when I do my eagle workshops, we have the eagles grabbing the fish, and I tell people 8,000, boy, it's a big, slow eagle flying by. You don't need it for the eagle. You need it for the water splashing. You want that to be crisp and frozen for the dynamic power in the image. So as you can see, those Orioles are, those wingtips are really, really crisp. Now, a lot of people will tell me, you know, if they haven't used the shutter speed and it's blurry wingtips, they go, well, it gives it a sense of motion. I don't know about that. I think that's just bad text, but it depends. If you want a sense of motion, I would go even slower and make it really purposeful. But today we can get away without using flash and using, you know, high shutter speeds. In fact, I'm starting to push that up even further now, to create even better images with even smaller birds. So, all right, I'm about to talk about habitat in your images. Any questions on that?
I actually have one there. Everyone is just loving the, the information, but, when you're doing in the 8,000ths of a second, your auto ISO, I guess?
I don't shoot anything auto,
Oh,
and that's debatable. And there's nothing wrong with that, but
Yeah.
you might as well be an aperture priority or shutter priority, because you're allowing the computer and the camera to decide on your exposure. So for example, see this bald eagle right here?
Mhm.
If, you know, if I've got control over the exposure, the white head, the dark bird, and he's on a blue background, that's one thing. If he flies up into the sky and the sky's overcast or white or a different color, that auto ISO, the sensor is going to see that change in light and is going to change your ISO on you, which changes the exposure. So I personally don't use anything auto. So yeah.
So what
What I
kind of
do,
ISO would you use when you're like in this, for instance?
yes, so I have no problem using 4,000 or 6,400 ISO to get 8,000 shutter.
Very
And I could
good.
do a whole nother talk on how to get the cleanest images out of that. It's
And,
incredible.
and while we were talking, another question then came in, which says, do you use denoise?
I've been using denoise since they started. And if you really want to, depends on your camera brand, because DxO Pure Raw 4, I know you're recording this so people can go back and get this reference, but DxO Pure Raw 4 is their latest version. It only does raw files, and I know it works fantastic with Nikon and possibly Canon. I think Sony, it's something you'd have to research. I'm a Nikon shooter, but you can, I put in some ridiculously high ISO images. I was shooting prairie chickens. It was almost dark, and I was shooting at 25,000 ISO. And the raw files were just a big blob of mud. And I threw one in there, and I was just mind blown. I could not believe what it did. And so you should try that. So for anything over 6,000 ISO, I put it through DxO. Anything below that, I use Topaz denoise.
Gotcha.
And again, I could do a whole nother thing just on how to use denoise, because it's a very sophisticated and powerful program. but most people overdo it. So you can get rid of the noise and keep all the sharp detail pretty easily by just a few certain things. Yeah. Anything
Good.
else on that, Liz?
That's it. You're good to go.
Great. All right. So I'm going to talk about when you're taking pictures of birds, you go out for a day, or you're trying to build a portfolio of bird imagery. I'm going to try to encourage you to lean into getting more birds in habitat. So I do bald eagle workshops every year, and this is a classic shot that everybody gets hundreds of these with grabbing a fish, and it's wonderful. Lovely blue, calm blue ocean there. So now we're doing stuff with wide angle lenses, and we have I believe Sean did this with me. We have a landing craft where the front of the boat drops down to water level, and we just have 4 people laying there with their cameras at the water, photographing these eagles. And you've got the scenic of the mountains in the background. Okay. And I've got a bunch of those shots. And then I got up on top of the roof of the boat and shot down, trying to get the birds smaller in the frame and showing more of the Alaska scenery. So I really encourage you to do that. And you can even take it to streams. So here's an image that has 5 bald eagles in it. Okay. So why am I doing this? To show a sense of habitat and place, to show their environment and their domain, and just to give respect to the subject. So I definitely, when I started out and I got a telephoto lens, I couldn't believe how close the birds looked, and everything was crammed big in the frame. And it looked like the only place it could fit was on a field guide. And I tell you, I love doing birds small in the frame now, just showing more habitat. Here's another example of this. The classic common loon with the babies, and that's lovely. Nothing wrong with that at all. But you want to also show habitat. Here's a family of loons as the sun's coming up in the morning. This is at 4 a.m. up in British Columbia. And then we had a foggy morning, which, a loon in a foggy morning lake just sounds perfect. So I got that. So, including the habitat can tell a lot about the subject and about their domain and their behaviors and so on. And it just tells more of a story. This is kind of how I used to photograph back in the day when I wanted to see the detail and the sharpness in the bird. And there's nothing wrong with that. And if this was submitted to a magazine, that's probably the crop that they would use to put the title on the top or whatever. But I back away now and I try to show more of their habitat where they are. Meadowlarks, you've got a lot of them in Florida, and they're in the fields, and the fields can, especially when they've got wildflowers, it's lovely to photograph in that way. Here's an extreme example. I'm sure you can see the bird. If you can't, it's so camouflaged. That's I call it common paraki. It's a species of nighthawk found in South Texas. And what's amazing about these birds is they know that they blend in. They land there and they know they look like the ground. I think that's pretty awesome. So I get the close-up shot, and that's great. But I really want to show how the bird, and that bird it looks like he's sleeping, but he's not. He's completely watching me, but he's closing his eyes to try to blend in even more, but he's watching me very closely. But they know that you really can't see them, so they don't fly away. They just stay there until if you got too close. But here's another shot of that bird. I'm going to leave that there for a minute till you find him. Some of you will find that easier than others. And I completely broke the rule of thirds there, just because it's cryptic and because it's a puzzle. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to put him where you expect him to be. I'm going to put him way off up there. So he's up there in the upper left, right? But how awesome is it to show the bird in the choices that they make and the habitat and the environment? I mean, that tells a lot about his personality, and it gives it more awe in my experience. So I went to even more extremes, and probably a little easier to see him there in the upper left. Okay. But it just tells, it's fun trying to find these birds to photograph. That's the crazy thing. But once you find one, it's easier to find more because, but they look like all the other sticks and stumps in the woods. So here is a photo of a Dunlin chick. Can anyone see that? I wish I was with you all live because I have fun with the audience doing these, but I can't hear anybody out there. But anyway, I took this in Iceland. It's a Dunlin chick, and there he is right there. Okay. And how awesome is it that the parents know when they raise their young that the young are going to blend into this environment? And I think that's the beauty of showing the habitat, right? Here is a European golden plover chick. I'm going to say, can you see him? But I can't hear your response. But let me show you this. This is not my hand. This was a scientist, and he gave me permission to use this image. The chick in his hand on the right blends in with the moss that's all on the ground. Now, I want to take the parents of that bird for a drink because I'm like, that is awesome. They lay their eggs and raise their young where they know those babies will not be seen. Okay. And there's the bird in the environment right there. So, you know, being a bird photographer, I think there's some responsibility to actually bring the viewer into their life, not just their beautiful detail on their feathers, but the way that they survive. I mean, it's pretty incredible. Now, this is not a bird. This is a moth. It's a Hamapatera moth. I have to read my own notes. On a tree. Can you guys see him? I can't hear you. Anyway, there he is. Right? Again, I could show a close-up of the moth, but how boring that is. I mean, look at that moth nose when he's flying around, picks a tree, lands there, and knows that no one can see him. I just think that's incredible. There's another moth. I don't know which moth this is, but he's on a pine tree. And give that guy a beer. Look at him blending in. All right. And one more I'm going to show you. And you may have seen this. This thing went viral on social media. And I was really honored that David Attenborough gave me a shout out and said this is one of the awesomest images of bird in camouflage. And I've shot, there's an owl in this image. I don't know if you see it or not. If you haven't seen this image before, you may not see the owl, but I'm going to show you the next image when he turned his head and looked at me. Okay, so there's nothing great about the image. It's just you know, it's busy and there's not, I mean, I got lots of images of him when I walked around the other side and had him on the branch with a nice distant background. But when I walked around to get a different angle, he completely disappeared on me. I thought there was an owl right there. And so I got that photograph, and technically it's nothing great, but what it says about the owl is what made it go viral. And I just thought I'd share that with you guys. So it's really important when you're building your bird photographs to back away, kind of look for different perspectives. And talking about perspectives, that's going to be my next segment. So before I jump there, did we have any questions?
We do not have any questions.
Okay.
Just a lot of wonderful comments.
Okay, great. I'll move on then. So choosing a shooting perspective. Now, this is something I feel very strong about. So this is a group of my clients down in, where was I? South Texas, at a pond, lots of ducks, and they're used to people, and they're standing up, taking pictures. And that's what most people do, right? And then I've got some people that will lay down and take pictures, right? Now, what's the difference? This is what I want to really share with you because this is so important. Here's a picture of a short-billed dowitcher in the water feeding, okay? I'm standing up taking that picture, right? Or, you know, this is an example of people, what you get if you're standing up shooting this bird, right? Now, the difference is, because you're shooting down, you're in your frame, you've got a certain amount of distance of water. And it's not that great because you're shooting down. So you've probably got, if you look below the bird, the edge of the frame is probably 4 feet away. And the top of the frame is probably 15, 20 feet away. And what that does is it renders the water much busier, okay? You're also looking down on the bird. What is really powerful is laying down. You see the difference? It's the same bird feeding, except now, if you look at the top of the frame, that's probably 100 yards away, which is impossible to get in focus. And the foreground is probably 15 feet towards you, which is impossible to get in focus if you're focused on the bird. So it becomes, you get that bokeh and you get the bird stands out. But the most important reason that you should get down low and shoot the bird is because the picture of the dowitcher is how humans see the bird. Because we're all walking around 5 feet tall or whatever height we are. The bottom one is how the birds see each other. And that is a huge difference. If you really want to capture any wildlife, you want to present it to the viewer how the subject sees each other. You want to be in their world. The top image is more about us. The bottom image is about the bird, in my opinion. And once you get into doing that, it's very passionate. I mean, you won't ever stand up again. You'll just want to get down low. Now, it's a lot easier to get down low now because we can shoot with our little flipped out screens and get the camera low and shoot from looking down versus before we had to lay down to look through the viewfinder. And I used to do a lot of shooting from my car. I shot that upper shot there of the curlew doing a wing spread from the window of my car. And you can see, it's not a throwaway image, but you see the background is really busy. Okay. And it is perspective from a human. It took me years to get that shot back. I wanted that shot from a low perspective and I finally got it, the one on the bottom. You see the difference? You're down in the bird's world. This is how another curlew would be seeing that curlew. You're bringing this intimacy into your photography and you're sharing that with the viewer. That is 100 times better than the image above, in my opinion. Here's some examples of some clients. I was talking to you about the boat, the drop front boat, so we get the images really low. But look at the difference. The camera is literally inches above the water. You're in the eagle's life there. You're the intensity of what he's doing. You're not down on top of him. Birds on water, absolutely you want to get down low to get in their worlds. We got under sheets on a snowy minus 30 degrees to photograph these sharp-tailed grouse. I could have put up a blind and sat there or, but no, I want to get down low. Look at the difference. You're on the ground, their feet do these little dances. You can't see that if you're shooting down below. So it's really worth it. Laying on the beach, there's a killdeer sitting on eggs. And being down in that perspective, it also, you'd be amazed how close birds will let you get if you're laying down flat because they don't see you as a human threat. So I belly crawl up to subjects and they let me get really close. And to make it even work even more, I sometimes will put a head net over my face to remove the human face. And I kind of freak everybody out on the beach, but that's another part of the fun. So here's an example. This is all workshop stuff. There's a little river in Alaska we go, and getting down with the dippers right down at water level is just, again, do you see the difference? You're right in their world. It's just got a more powerful image or results. The ruddy ducks, we always are in the water with their tripods, with the lenses just above water level, and it's a lot of work. But the image results is so much better. I was driving along the road and I saw this spruce grouse. So I got out of the car and I lay down to try to get rid of the road. They want it to look like a road, and you can't really tell it's a road when you get down low. And here's one of the clients laying down on this ice, trying to get a wide angle of all the birds from a low perspective. I think it's wonderful imagery. Here's a belly crawling up. If you ever see a hawk, a raptor that's caught something in prey, once they catch it, they'll take off if you go near them. But once they start feeding, you can absolutely get down low and crawl up to them and get really close. They will not leave. I've done this numerous times. So there's a Cooper's hawk feeding on a quail, and I'm right down in his world. And that, I think, it makes a huge difference. Now, I am encouraging you to get down low and get on your belly, but full disclosure, I cannot guarantee that you're going to get back up. And I'm finding this more and more so when as I get older. So now a lot of the times what I'm doing is I'm hanging my lens down and I'm actually flipping up the LCD screen. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here. And the autofocus is so good now, I don't even look through the viewfinder, and I can just put that on the bird and shoot that way. And I've even built rigs for that, which is great. that's a whole nother talk. So I'm going to talk about backgrounds, and if there's any questions.
Yeah, people were agreeing that the whole getting back up thing is
Oh.
is an issue. Yeah. And
I
then
have, I have a lot of photos of clients that can't get up, and before I help them, I always take a picture just for fun. And it, you know, I couldn't put those on there, but it is true. And yeah, you need help, especially if you've been laying down for a while and your neck's sore.
oh, that is hysterical. And then maybe you're going to talk about this in a little bit, but maybe you didn't, I missed it, but the camo that you're wearing, if you could talk about that a little bit. And then somebody said too, what is the dish called in your camera shot of the curlew or your camo shot?
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. So I took that one for granted. Let's go back to that, wherever
Okay.
that was. Oh, this one. All right. So that's called a skimmer. There's a company called naturescapes.net. They sell that. And
Oh,
basically you attach your ball head or your gimbal head to it, and it can move around on the sand really easily. So I push it in front of me and then I follow behind it. Now the head net, I buy these 3D, they're not ghillie suits. Ghillie suits are much heavier. They're 3D camo suits. You get them on Amazon or anywhere. They're really lightweight. It's a light mesh and they have these little 3D leaves on them. And it comes with a head net and it just has the eyes open. And I'm telling you, it night and day when it comes to getting close to wildlife. Okay. So I've actually that particular photo there is a friend of mine, and his rig is a little higher. When I shoot it, my lens is way down near the dish. And I've had the phalo ropes, which is a shorebird, walk right up and look inside the hood for insects. That's how close you can get, because they don't see you as a human form. And if you hide your face, especially my face, I can get much closer. So yeah, and
wow.
I
Well,
do have, yeah.
there's a question here, and I think you're answering it because this person said, how does he get the birds to land where he wants? It's more about you scooshing your way, I think, hidden up to the birds.
Actually, no, that's just field techniques as far as moving up on shorebirds. Shorebirds and other birds will literally let you crawl right up on them if you crawl slowly and push the thing in front of you. Getting birds onto perches and stuff, that's a whole nother topic, whole nother talk. And since you've invited me to talk about, or at least answer that question, you need to check out all my ebooks and videos that I have, because there's a lot of them all in there. How do you get birds to land where you want? How do I do all my setups? I have all that information on there. I know
Wonderful.
that's a shameless plug, but I'm really trying to help people.
Yeah.
And if maybe I can come back at another day and I'll do a different topic on that
Yeah,
and show you how I do it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Super. Okay. Well, then
Okay.
based on that, you're free to go.
Okay, you cut out there. I'm good to go.
Yeah, you're good to go on the
Okay,
next
great.
one. On the
All
next
right, so
thing.
backgrounds is important. When you're doing bird photography, I see people taking pictures all the time, and I'm going, oh my gosh, if you just move to the left a little bit. So here's a golden cheek warbler, an endangered species only found or photographed in Texas. And they live in a busy habitat, and it's hard to get them out in a nice clean spot. But so there's the image, lovely bird, sharp, all of that. But I didn't like the background with all the sticks. So what I did was I moved around. I actually cut one of the branches and I stuck it out of the tree. And I know what birds do. Birds will always take the firmest branch whenever they're flying around. And they'll always take the part that's, I pulled a few of the little leaves off, and I know he was going to land there. So, but I was ready with my background. So it was a goal. So I worked backwards. I found the background that I wanted. Then I zip tied the perch where I wanted that. And then we used a little audio, and he called and jumped right on there. So that's how I did that. I don't know why there's a blank page there. All right, here's an example, right? There's a blue jay in my backyard. I'm trying to photograph him, and he's right there. Now, most people don't pay attention to the backgrounds because they're so excited about the subject, and that's understandable. So the blue jay's there, you're getting nice full frame shots of him with your telephoto lens, and you're not paying attention that you've got half a tree and half a green background. So what did I do? I just moved 2 feet to the left, blocked the tree out of my frame. Do you see the difference? So you definitely want to try to look for that. it doesn't mean that you have to be a better photographer. It just means, or have a better lens. It just means look for that when you're taking your pictures. Now, when can you, allow a busy background? Well, so here's a red-tailed hawk, and that is very busy. But if the whole frame is equally busy, then it works. I don't know if that makes sense. He's up in the rule of thirds. Okay, so that works. And you can see the fall leaves and the branches. There's no big gaps of like light or dark or one big branch. I mean, it's kind of evenly distributed, and it gives a sense of fall, and it works. Here's another example of a busy background, a scarlet tanager. This was shot on an overcast day. If it was sunny, behind all those leaves would be black and dark and shadowy. But because it was overcast, it kind of rendered this nice mosaic of soft greens. And so that's busy. So it works. Okay, so there are times when it does work if your busyness is equally spread throughout the frame. All right, I'm moving on to virtual reality. I don't know if you have any questions yet on the backgrounds or not. No? Okay, I'll move on. So here's something that most people don't get or don't know or to look for. So here's a picture which is very easy to get where you guys live, a great egrets in the marsh. And if I was with you live in an audience, I would ask you what is wrong with that photo to see what feedback you give me. Because most people would say, well, is the horizon straight? Is he rule of thirds and all that stuff? No, here's what I want you to look for. Look at the length of the bird's legs, great egret's legs. All right, now that you know how long the legs are, can you see on the image on the left that I've cropped them off? Just because they're in the water doesn't mean I get to crop them off. So if you're going to crop this properly, that's how it needs to be. You have to leave room for the virtual legs, right? Just because they're under the water, if you crop them, here's the thing, I've probably messed this up for you now, because now that you see it, when you do crop it, you're going to be like, ouch, and I was the same way. Here's another example, right? A pelican diving into the water, probably another shot you can get in Florida, right? And what's wrong with that? Well, look how long his bill is. So I've cropped his beak off, haven't I? So if I'm going to crop that, I have to allow room for the virtual bill. And once you know this now, you're going to see this in other people's images, and you're going to go, oh, I see what they did. They cut that off. To me, it kind of spoils the image. Here's a long-tailed duck. The problem with the long-tailed duck is most of the time their long tail, which is this length, is laying flat in the water. So you tend to crop it off, but you can't. If a biologist or a magazine editor or as someone who knows birds and you're showing them the image, you have to allow the room for the tail, even though you don't see it. Okay. Now, that's my opinion. That doesn't mean that's the rule, but that's what I think improves your photography. So let me go back to the original long-tailed duck, right? That's a better composition for the body. But to me, I've just cut off part of the bird, especially what he's named for. So I moved him further up. It's kind of like that pheasant image, he's got the long tail. Where do you put him? Well, I think he's a long-tailed duck. I want to include the long tail, so it pushes him over there. So I'm going to talk about finding an image within the images that you're taking. And this might get you excited, but before I do that, is there any questions on that last segment?
We have no questions.
Okay, good. Moving on. All right. So there's a lot of times when I will take images. I know I use bald eagles a lot, but because we do so many of them, but it's a lovely shot, but I've clipped the wings. So what do? Do I spend the time and try to fix the wings, which is a lot of work? It can be done. I have a video on that. But what I want you to look for, here's an image that was taken by cropping in this image. You see that? So there's images within your images that you're not seeing that are more powerful. So there's the C shape of the head and the claws and the intensity of the bird coming in for the prey, right? Look at the background balance of the negative space, right? So you get to crop that in. So does it matter how much of a crop? I don't care. I mean, I used to shoot with 5 megapixel camera when they first came out. Now I'm shooting with 45 megapixels. So if I crop off 90%, I'm still way ahead than I was 15 years ago or 20 years ago. So it's not what you crop off, it's what you leave, in my opinion. Right? We can up-res images from now on. But look, don't be shy to look for like the images you're thinking about throwing away. Is there a better image in there? And I hope that encourages you. And I'm going to show you a few more, right? Here's one with a crooked horizon. And most people I know, you'd say, well, that would be a keeper. But if you're with me on the workshop, you're going to get so many of these that you get picky. And what happens is the bird's right wing is gorgeous, but his left wing is kind of like not gorgeous, right? It's kind of folded in. So rather than throw that away, here's what I came up with, right? Did you see that before I told you? No. Now, going back to the shutter speed, you wouldn't get this if you weren't shooting at 8,000 because the water wouldn't be crisp and frozen. This is why I shoot at 8,000 in action, because it's not for the wings or the bird, it's for the water. Now look what I've got. I can zoom in, I can show the grab with the water splash. It tells a story, right? So before you throw those away, look for the image within the image, right? So we're throwing fish out for the eagles, and a lot of times the gulls would come down and grab them. And they're fast. I mean, they come in, they grab them, they actually go under the water, come up, and they're gone. And I'm like shooting, and I'm like, okay, who wants a picture of a gull grabbing a fish? But, wings are clipped. But then I zoom in. Now, there's the 8,000 shutter that's really helping me because it's showing the explosion of the water and it's freezing it as if I'm in a studio with multi-flash. And that's the power of the image there. And the water is transparent, so you can see the bird's eye through there. You got so look for images within an image. We're doing the loons up in Canada, and the loon does a wing flap, and he's too close to me. My lens is too big, and I clip the wings. So do you keep that? Do you fix the wings and add canvas and spend all the time, or do you just look for something different? And I moved in, cropped it in to show the mosaic of the patterns, right? So there's lots of opportunities in your images to find other things. Here's another one. A lovely shot of a razor bill, okay? The background, the composition, tack sharp, everything's really good, right? But look at this. I looked at the eyeball and I noticed that there's this three-dimensional squiggle around the pupil that has never been documented. And they all have this. And when I zoomed in and I saw this, I'm like, now there is a lovely composition and it's very cryptic, but it works, right? So that's fine, but zoom in, look for images within your images. Down in South Texas, I do this workshop every January, and we do a lot of flight action and lots of great stuff. And it's very predictable, very productive. And here's a shot of caracaras fighting. Nothing great. So how do I crop that? It's kind of an awkward composition, right? So I move in, I'm like, hey, the wings are sticking way out. So my negative space a little off. I could rotate it, and I'm struggling with it. And then I realize, forget the wings. There's the power. That's the action, right? Look at this. He's screaming. The claws are grabbing. They're fighting. My negative space around the birds is working really good. The wing, the tail spread, the claws spread, right? Now I'm bringing the viewer into the actual intensity of the fight versus that. Okay. So don't be shy to crop and look for the energy within the image. So I'm going to end on that subject there, and I'm going to talk about the right depth of field, which I think came up in a question earlier. Before I do that, any questions come up?
Yes, you just had one question and it was, you said you shoot with 600mm f4 lens, but for those of us starting out on a budget,
Yep.
what is a good starter lens?
Well, there's very good inexpensive zoom lenses that go out to 600, from 2 to 6 or 4 to 6. Many of them out there now, and they're lightweight and they're wonderful. They don't have the speed of an f4 because they're going to be an f5.6 or f8 sometimes. So you're going to have a slower acquisition time. And what that means is you see a bird flying, you go to snap on, it's going to hunt a little slower. where an f4 lens is letting in so much light that it's going to snap onto your subject. And that's why they're more expensive, because they're just quicker. Doesn't mean they're sharper. It doesn't mean they're any closer. It just means that you're getting faster autofocus acquisition. And at some point down the road, you will really want that. But starting out, I wouldn't tell you what lens to get, but whatever brand of camera you have, look for the zooms that are, there's PF lenses now. There's all kinds of compromises that they've done, but they're still 600 millimeter, which is great. So, and that's not the only lens I shoot with. I have all the ranges of lenses, and that's my primary lens if I'm shooting at a distance, because it's a lot easier to capture imagery and not have the bird fly away when you're backed off. But there are times when I'm, like tomorrow, I'm using a 17 millimeter lens on a diving kingfisher. So that lens has got to be this close to the bird. So that's a whole nother subject. But yeah, so there's benefits to every lens. Don't feel like you can't be a bird photographer if you don't have a telephoto lens. That's not true at all. It just means you got to get more creative.
That's all I have, Alan.
Great, thank you. All right, the right depth of field. There's not a lot to this, except here's an image of a yellow-billed cuckoo. And anytime you're photographing birds, 90% of the time they're going to be facing you. And it's okay to get the focus on the eye, and it's totally okay if the tail is blurred. And the reason for that is because the closest thing to you is the eye and the face, okay? And that's where the connection is, and that's where the energy is. And so as the eye moves away, it is okay for that tail to be a little bit soft, out of focus. Now, the opposite is true if the bird is facing away from you. So now the head is further away. The closest thing to the camera is the tail. So if the tail's blurry, it doesn't work as well. Now, I'm being this is more advanced stuff. This is kind of nitpicky, but most people don't pay attention to that. But the bird on the left his eye is tack sharp, his head is sharp, but the tail is out of focus. And most people don't pay attention to that. But here's what you want. You want that tail to be tack sharp, okay? And so you increase your depth of field. So if you're shooting at f4, you shoot at f8. If you're shooting at f8, you go to f11. You just do what it takes to get the tail in focus. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. It's almost impossible to get enough depth of field when you're this close with a 600 millimeter lens, because the depth of field is so narrow. So what I did, and you can do this too, is I took a picture of his head, then I took a picture of his tail in sharp focus, and then I merged them together in Photoshop, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. What you're ending up with is exactly what was in front of you, but what I don't want to happen is have the limitations of the camera to dictate to me the result in the end. I just don't agree with it, right? So just because I can't get enough depth of field, I'd have to go to f32, and then my background's going to be busy. So I took a shot of his head and a shot of his tail and merged them together later. There are times when you can increase the depth of field. So here's a picture of a barred owl, and he's facing the camera. So his tail is not exactly in focus, but you'd never notice it. It's fine. It totally works fine. But when he turned around, I definitely needed that tail to be in focus, because all those feather details are the closest thing to the viewer. So you definitely want to increase your depth of field. So that's all I'm going to say on that. There is no magic depth of field or f-stop. It's just because every lens is different in focal length, right? So I'm going to talk about reflections. Any questions before I move on that?
Oh, no
Okay.
questions right now.
All right. I know I'm moving pretty quick. I have a lot to share. All right. So when do you include reflections? This is a question that comes up a lot. Here's a snowy plover. I'm on the beach, and I'm laying down doing my belly crawling, and there's some reflection in the water. Now, do I keep that or not? So here, I'm going to give you some information that will help you. In this particular case, no, because all it is a white blob, and it's competing with the bird, and I think it's distracting personally. So what do? Well, I just raise my lens up and remove it to most degree, and then shoot that. That's just a general term. So when do you decide to actually keep a reflection? So here's my rule on that. Here's a female goldeneye, okay? And it's a lovely shot, got a reflection. Now, do I keep that? I only keep reflections when I can ID the bird by the reflection. All right, so on the left, if I didn't see the bird's head on top and I looked at that reflection, could I tell what it is? No. So it has no value and no place in my image. The one on the right, now the reason I'm telling you this is because you can't make this happen, but you're gonna, if you've got a bird on a pond and you're shooting 100 images of him, when you go home, you're probably not going to be looking too closely at the reflections, but I want you to, because some are going to be sharper and clearer depending on where the bird is in the water and where the ripples are and then when the wind stops and all of that. So the bird on the right, that reflection, I can ID that bird by that reflection. So that I include that in the frame. So what do I do with the one on the left? Well, I don't discard it. I just crop it in tighter. So I create a different image of it. And I keep the one on the right with the reflection because that marries it. All right, one other thing about reflections, because we're not paying attention to them in the field, this happens a lot. You crop off the reflection. So you want to pay attention to that, right? So this is a Wilson's plover I think I ID'd that other plover wrong earlier, snowy plover. All right, so this one's a Wilson's plover and sitting in a pond, nice calm pond, and I'm photographing him and I'm not really looking down at the reflection and I kind of cropped his head, but I'm doing this for tutorial reasons. I actually did include the reflection here, right? So you want to pay attention to that. If you've got birds in calm water and there's a lovely reflection, you definitely don't want to crop it off. Or if the bird's small in the frame and you've got the reflection and you do this in post-processing and you're cropping, here's how I crop my images. Whatever distance I give at the bottom from the reflection to the bottom of the frame, I double it on top. Okay? That's just my way of doing it because I give priority to the real bird and less to the reflection. All right. Now, there are times you can break that rule, but that's how I do it. All right. I don't split them evenly. So that's how it looks at the end. Now, unless you've got something like this, right? You get to decide, do I want to do, so you can see it's almost like from the bottom of his tail at the bottom, the distance on top is twice. But there are times when you break the rules. So like for this, now we're getting into a more of a graphic kind of a look, right? I mean, that water was so still, that reflection is so strong that, and because I'm cropping out most of the bird, I am zooming in, I'm selling that as it's more of an artistic kind of image, right? And I got lucky the fact that the bird is creating water movement, but yet the image is still too. So, so you get to decide on the reflections, like how to include them into your final crop. So that's a little information on that. Now, speaking of reflections, if I was with you all in person, I would ask you, this is a cinnamon teal on lovely green water. I'd ask you what is wrong with that image, because there's something very wrong with it. And most of you probably already know. And if you don't, I'm going to point it out to you. And then this is a problem I see in a lot of images, even in landscape images, is the horizon straight. In this case, the water is not level. It's like the bird is swimming on an uphill lake. Okay. Now, I take images like that because I'm working fast or I'm on a boat that's moving or whatever. But the thing is, when you get back home and you're in Photoshop, you need to straighten that out. But most people don't even look for it. They don't even see it. So I want you to start seeing that. Landscape photographers, you know, if the horizon is not straight, then that's a bad thing, right? So you get to see that clearer, but you need to see it on the water. Now, how do you know it's not straight? Here's a simple thing to do. In Lightroom or Photoshop, all you do is take a vertical line and draw it down, okay? And the reflection should be match that right on the line. So it doesn't matter if you put it on the eye or the tail. I put it on the edge of the bill. It should have met the edge of the bill on the reflection, and then it would be the water straight. So I don't do it the other way. I don't try to draw a line horizontally to try to see if it's straight, because the bird is not flat, he's round. So it kind of can be a little confusing, but if you have a reflection, it'll always marry, the reflection will always marry the subject if you draw a straight line down to it. So what do? I just put it in Photoshop and I rotate it. You see that? Right? Went from there to there. Then look at the line now, and you can just take the ruler in Photoshop and drag a line right over. Just take your cursor, grab the ruler, and if you drag it across, it gives you a straight line. And you just put it right over the image, anywhere on the image, and it'll tell you if your image is level or not, right? So there is before, there's after, okay? And then I remove the line and there's my shot, okay? So I want you guys to be looking for that. Now we're coming up to the last segment. So is there any other, any questions on that stuff?
There was one and I was trying to answer it because it's stuff you've already talked about. But if you don't mind, maybe trying to condense it. They were saying with your high shutter speed, how do you decide what aperture and ISO? And you've talked about it, about the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I know you said that the minimum shutter speed is 1/1600, and that if it's a bird in flight, you do at least 1/8000. And I think maybe this person is the whole aperture thing, even.
Yeah, it's kind of a separate conversation, but I mean, I could try to touch on it. And every situation is different. If I'm doing a hawk sitting on a branch or an eagle sitting on a branch and posed, I can shoot at 50th of a second, really slow, because there's nothing going on. There's no movement. And I can keep a really clean ISO and I can get as much depth of field as I want. But for, today's cameras are so clean and we have 20 frames, 30 frames a second. Why not use them? So I'm always prepared for action. That's why I keep my shutter speeds higher. Now, what does that mean? It means you have to choose less depth of field or you have to choose higher ISO. You got to compromise somewhere to get the correct exposure. This is something I teach on the workshops in the field. It's a lot easier when I have you next to me and we have a certain situation and a certain light, certain subject. It's a lot easier to go over. It's hard to do it in a conversation. So the depth of field is really personal preference as to what. Now, in general, I would keep my f4 lens at f8. That's just a general f-stop, because
Okay.
you always want to, whatever lens you buy, if it's a 5.6, you want to go down one stop when you're shooting, because that's when the lens is the sharpest. So if I'm on a f4 lens, I definitely don't want to be shooting wide open. I want to be at 5.6 because that's when it renders the edges of the lens much sharper. That's just in all lenses in photography. So, okay, I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Great. So now you're building a portfolio of photography for bird photography. So you want to include things like drama, action, and interest to all of your portfolio imagery, right? So in my opinion, I put a lot of work into what I call a good perch, and I'm going to show you why. Here's an example of an eastern phoebe, and he's sitting on a big stump. Now the stump is nice, it's weathered and has some character. Nothing wrong with that, but it's very dominating. So what would be better is if the perch was smaller, still got character. And if you notice, all these shots have a distant background that's out of focus. But that's not the point. The point is about the perch. I do a lot of what they call setup photography, meaning I get the birds to come where I want in many different situations. So I actually spend a lot of time looking for perches that I think are gorgeous for the bird. And I'll show you those in a minute. And then I put them in where I want them and get the bird to land there. Separate talk, but choosing the perch is really important. So we're going down here, getting smaller. Now that I think works better for the bird, but what works best is the smallest perch possible for a songbird. It's harder to get them on a more delicate perch, but I think the overall result is just much sweeter. So if you look at the image on the right versus the one on the far left, you see the difference. I mean, it's easy to get any bird on a big fat dead snag, but getting them on a real sweet, delicate little perch is just the goal for me. All right. Now, how do I choose the size of the perch for a certain species? I look at the diameter of their grip, right? If it's a bald eagle or a crow or a little hummingbird, they all have a diameter they like to grip on. That is the best. That's my goal. Now, it makes it hard. This is an orchard oriole, by the way, but you can see his grip is kind of appropriate for that size branch, right? So that's important. Now, talking about perches. The more attractive the perch, the better. I'm just going to show you examples. I'm not going to go through a lot, but here's some examples of perches. All of these I've put together for the bird. And they're either next to bird feeders, or there's multiple different techniques that I use. The bottom left is a hooded oriole. Just out of frame is a hummingbird feeder. And he's been coming to it to feed on. So he lands there first. I could have put a dead stick there. There's no value in that. So I go the extra mile to get those shots. The shot there in the upper middle of the spotted sandpiper, those guys are notorious for running around on the ground, but if they find a stump, they love to run up on it. Knowing that, that's another thing I could tell you about being a better bird photographer, is become a better birder, learn birds. I mean, go out with birders and study and their habitats or their habits and their behaviors. So I know that spotted sandpipers like to run up on stumps. So I found this old mossy stump and I laid it down in the wildflowers and I waited, and it didn't take long for him to get up there because they like to have an overview of their area. So there's lots of ways to do these things. The upper left is I can't remember the name of that berry, but we put those up, and in South Texas, I bring them down from where I was living, and there's very few of those berries down there. So all the birds jump on there and feed on them. And I just think it makes better images. You definitely want to add to your portfolio a collection of birds landing, those kind of images. Now, this is where your shutter speeds come in, okay? And there's nothing more I'm going to say about that than just to include images of birds landing. And the flicker on the bottom right coming to a nest cavity, birds landing on perches. There's stories behind how I get each of all these, which I won't go into. I'm just kind of encouraging you to try to make sure you don't just have a whole collection of birds perched. You want to add a different variety. You want to also have birds taken off. And a lot of us could do that, especially now cameras having pre-capture or post-capture, what they call where you press the shutter, it's taking 30 frames all the time and dumping 30 frames. And then when you press the shutter down, it stores those. So you do not miss the takeoff. And it's getting pretty exciting now, the cameras, especially with Sony. They have the new camera that does that with raw capture. It's incredible. So yes, you want to have images of birds taking off. If you're doing flight shots, I was talking to you about wings up or wings down, but the real value in flight shots is what we call top shots, which is when they're banking. All right. Now, does that mean you can make them bank? No, but these are the ones that when you have them, they're your highest value images. So you want to really capture those. Those are the ones that you'll put your name on, or you post, or whatever you do with your images. Those are the higher values, but you want to try to seek for those. And by the way, most of these are from workshops, like the Cardinal down there. For example, in January, when I go to South Texas, we get dozens of these kinds of shots because I have it all set up and I teach people how to do that. And then, of course, besides the top shots, you have the bottom shots, which is the reverse, right? The bald eagle upside down, the boreal chickadee on the right coming in. There's your 8,000 working for you, your 8,000 shutter. There's no way you would capture that without it. And landing shots there. Now, editors in magazines will tell you the value goes up if you have two of the same species in the frame, okay? So you want to try to include those, males and females, or whatever species you can get. If you get two of them the same, that adds value to your imagery. Different species together is even more valuable. So here you've got the upper right is the east and west version of the cardinal. You got the Pyroluxia and the northern cardinal. Those you can only get in South Texas and some parts of Arizona. And then look at the upper middle one. You've got a little ladderback woodpecker. You wouldn't know how small that woodpecker is until you sit next to a white-winged dove. So those add a lot of information to images. So editors love that. So those are valuable. Shorebirds, two different shorebirds fighting down below. Again, it's not always that you make these happen, but when you see it, take pictures of it and include that in your portfolio. Males and females together, always high value, okay? The upper left is taken at Bosque. Everyone had already left. There was dozens and dozens, I mean, there were hundreds of geese in this pond. Everybody had left. The sun was going down. There's barely any light. and it was a beautiful sunset, and the sky was kind of pink, so the water looked pink. In the winter, geese pair up for the following season, so they mate up. So you get the males and females together, and I was lucky enough to find this pair isolated, capture them with the pink water, and that makes a great Valentine's card. So, male and female bluebirds, and the little yellow warblers lower left, male and female bathing together, right? That was in one of my workshops. I think it's adorable. Anytime you can get adults with young, all right? There's a little collection of, I mean, there's places to do these that are easier. I know in Florida, the upper right stuff is really easy. You guys have the best wading birds and marsh birds anywhere in North America. So, including the family shots is always wonderful. Make sure you also have headshots and close-ups in your portfolio. So different times you can get those, but when you really zoom in on that, it really shows the power of the eyes or the detail of the feathers. So those are always good to have in your portfolio. Images that show intent, meaning what is the bird about to do? So you can see the skimmer skimming. You have those in Florida. Little chickadee about to land. The bald eagle again, he's about to pounce, right? Lower left, I was lucky to capture this. It's not the most technically sharp image, but you've got a sharp-shinned hawk there chasing a scissor-tail flycatcher. So you can feel the intent of what's going on. And then the snowy owl about to pounce. So yeah, showing intent to territorial and display. This is a big part of bird life, and it happens all the time. And you definitely want to include some of that. We talked about the ruddy duck and his bubbling, and killdeers. You have those in Florida. You don't even know where their nests are. They're in parking lots. They're in your front yard, and when you go near them, you have no idea. And then suddenly the bird is doing a weird display. It's trying to get you to come away from the nest. It wants you to follow it. It's doing this broken wing thing, like, please follow me. Those are great things to capture. So be looking for that. The green-winged teal, lower right. I didn't know they did that, but that's how they display for the females. They curl up and they do this wonderful display. Of course, I'm on my belly, laying down. Took me 2 years to get up. Birdscapes. We talked about this. Showing birds small in the frame. Okay, lots of examples there. In the upper middle is Bosque del Apache. That was the sunset I was telling you about with all the geese. And little bald eagle in the lower left. Wonderful scenic shot. Wait for the bird to fly through. The lower right corner shot of the Arctic tern was on an island north of Iceland. And when you get off the boat, they give you these sticks. You can rent these sticks that you put over your head because the terns come down. Well, I didn't want the stick. I just took my camera and held it on my head with a wide angle lens. And as I heard, they screech when they come down. And I was just firing away. Probably took, I don't know, 1,000 images. And I ended up with 2 or 3 that were just like this, just perfect timing. And then I had to wipe all the bird poo off the lens, because that's what they do as well, besides scream at you. They like to dive bomb you and drop a bomb. Anyway, birds with prey. These are always valuable and add interest to images. So you come across different scenarios when you're out. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, so I've got a different collection of stuff. Birds with insects. And in one of my ebooks or videos, I can't remember, I show how easy this is to do. First, I'll show you how to get the birds on the perches. So let's say, for example, the bluebird in the upper right corner, although that's his own prey. But let's say, for example, the lower right corner, there's a curve-billed thrasher on a stump with nice stuff. He's got a big dragonfly. Well, he's been getting on that stump multiple times because I put it next to a feeder. So he hops up there and hops on the feeder. So I found a dragonfly on the front grill of my car, took it and put it on the stump. He jumps up there and picks up the it's just that simple. There's just a million versions of that I show you how to do. And then a lot of it is just placing perches near where they're traveling to feed their young. So they usually will stop first, check, make sure everything's safe. And if that's a perch that you've set up, they'll stop there with their insects. Birds with fish, right? So In Florida, you have a good chance of that with the terns feeding each other. I've got dippers on there, loons bringing back fish. I was talking before the talk tonight on the lower left corner. I'm working on this for workshops for next year where I've got belted kingfishers going underwater grabbing fish, and I'm starting to photograph those. Birds singing, all right? That's wonderful to capture birds in full song, and rather than just sitting there on a perch, boring looking. But when they're singing, it makes for great imagery. And I, as long as many other photographers, do workshops around that as well. Birds fighting. So this is why, you know, you've got a bird on a perch and you don't need the shutter speed. But if you've got 8,000 shutter and suddenly they burst into fighting, you've captured the image. If you don't have high shutter speed, you don't get it. So I'm a big component of putting your shutter speeds up, even if you don't need them. Okay, so there's some examples of fighting. Birds bathing, again, even though they're not a lot going on, but for the freezing of the water, you can see the water in these images is frozen when they're splashing it. That really adds a lot to the imagery, but you won't get it if you don't have high shutter speed. And then, of course, to end, we're going to do cuteness, anything cute. Any editor in any magazine will love anything that's so cute. So baby birds, and there's a few versions of different young babies. You want to add that to your collection. Okay. So just to finish up, if you don't mind, I know there's a lot of questions into different areas of bird photography. Just go on my website and take a look at some of the stuff I've done in great detail on how to attract birds to perches, how to work with songbirds. There's a lot of different things in there that will teach you how to do that. And you can go on each one and you can see the drop down of all the items that I teach. How to use audio. You know, I know it's a controversial subject, but I teach you how to use it quickly and effectively, so you're not stressing birds. And there's different techniques for different families of birds, and I go into all of that. All right. If you want to know about my workshops, just go on my website. It's alanmurphyphotography.com, and there's a tab at the top that says workshops, and all of those. And I go almost every month to somewhere in North America. I've kind of backed off of doing international, but the nice thing about international stuff, all the stuff that I do, or domestic, is highly productive photography. You're spending 4 or 5 days, lots of action. There's no waiting around or trying to find something. And then I really would love it if all of you would sign up for my newsletter, just because that's where I'm going to share lots of information. I do a workshop report every month showing what we've just done. And all my newsletters are archived, so you can go in and look at past newsletters. If you want to look at, if you're thinking about a workshop, you can go back through there and look at all the images that were taken over the years even. So there's on that. But my newsletters, you get first dibs of all the new stuff that's coming on, and so on, and publications. So with that, I think, I don't know how long I spoke, but I think I went over my time. But I appreciate all of you for allowing me to come and share my passion with you. So thank you.
Yes, Alan, you did. Thank you so much. You went definitely above and beyond. We appreciate it so much. And I'm going to post the information on the ebooks and all that kind of stuff online. And anybody that wants to rewatch the video, Jerry will get it posted on YouTube probably tomorrow. So, but Alan, thank you so much.
Thank you,
You
guys.
can unmute and clap if you want.
Yeah, golf
So
clap.
I'll go ahead and the comments are coming in, Alan. This is phenomenal, exciting, very impressive. I think maybe you're seeing those, but thank you very, very much.
You're welcome, guys. And I'd love to come back and share more with you.
Oh
Yes.
my gosh, that would be such a treat. This was phenomenal.
Everyone's asking, and they're like, why with this topic? That with that topic. So yeah, it will be talking.
Yeah, a lot to go over.
Okay, thank you. Sign them up.
Many, many thanks.
All right,
Okay,
I'm going to go
guys,
ahead
if
and
you're,
end.
if you don't need me, I'm going to sign out.
Absolutely. I'm going to end the video.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You guys were great.